Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell for notifications, upvote, comment, all of that good stuff. And don't forget to join our Subtext community. All of that, whenever we get information, we will put it there. Now, Saturday recruiting has been an Ole Miss staple for Locked On Ole Miss forever. We've been using somebody else. This is the new recruiting guy. This is Brian Smith. He's actually a neighbor of mine, kind of. How you doing, Brian?
It is ironic how close we are to one another. I mean, I was just in Winter Haven 2 or 3 days ago.
Yeah.
And so there you go. It's great to be here, man. I love talking about SEC football, SEC recruiting. So let's do it.
All right, let's just jump right off. Demond Williams was at Elite 11 this past weekend at Oxford High School. He came from Arizona to Oxford, Mississippi. What have you heard on the grapevine from about Demond?
Just how athletic he is off the cuff. The things that he does off script are not normal. I don't care. I know everybody has a run pass guy. I get it. But this is a little bit different than anybody else that you're going to see. Just at 5'11", how many guys can really run like that and still make those throws? His arm strength is one thing, because the way he throws, you think of somebody that's like 6'5", 230, but he's 5'11", 180, 190. He's built like a running back, but he can run. He can make people miss, all those things. Everybody's excited to see what Lane Kiffin will do with somebody like that anyway, because Lane's a great quarterback coach. Everybody knows that. I hope that he gets a chance to play early just because I like his style of play. That's just I will be surprised if he doesn't end up at Elite 11. And I also think that he's a kid that's got to be able to be himself. And I think Lane will let him do that once he gets to the college level.
Yeah, and he's a people might not know this about Demond, but he's an 11 100-meter dash kid. I mean, that is legit speed to go along with that rocket launcher of an arm.
That's why I like him so much, because Lane loves RPO. And this kid is just born to do it. Why would you not want him to be your guy in that offense? A lot of people probably say, he's 5'11". In Lane's offense, not going to matter. It'll work out just fine.
Yeah, and let's move in-state from there, go from Arizona to Mississippi. Camarion Franklin, the former, some top player in Mississippi, some sites have Jamonte Waller. Either way, you've got two defensive linemen in a state that just churns out defensive linemen. But what do you know about Camarion?
He's a great kid in terms of his ability to get off the ball, to hit people, just be physical, but he's developing, he's learning. He's a kid that I saw the end of his sophomore year going into his junior year at Under Armour in Dallas. And when he walked up to me, I'm like, he's one of those guys that just towering physical presence, and it just says SEC West. He's not a guy that you're going to worry about fitting in, okay? He's a day one, I can be in the rotation guy. And then he's also very coachable, very likable. The last time I texted with him, I asked him actually about one of his teammates. He's very encouraging, very positive. He's not going to be a problem in your locker room no matter where he goes. I think this is a kid that's going to be a top 25 kid for most services by the end of the year. The more he learns, because his ceiling is much higher than where he's at right now. He's got a lot to go, and I still think he's a 5-star talent. So, I mean, if they don't rank him number one, that also says a lot about Waller. But that's another conversation we'll talk about here in just a second. But, man, the length, the size, and all that, I mean, this is the kind of kid that Mississippi has sometimes, the Ole Miss has let him get away. You have to keep those kids at home if you're Lane Kiffin. You know he's going to score, but you got to recruit defensive players at a high level. You can't let him go to Alabama, especially. And this is the kind of kid that can change your program.
Yeah, and if you go from North Mississippi to South Mississippi, Jamonte Waller, he's the other kid that is blowing up inside the state. Him and Chris Davis down at Picayune, they've become quite the pair going in. I think they were state champions last year. But Jamonte, he's a different thing, because while Camarion has been the number one player for a while and everybody knew about him, Jamonte just kind of blew up in the offseason suddenly, kind of supernova like rise to 5-star.
That doesn't really surprise me about any kid in Mississippi. I've covered that state a few times. It is massive, but the kids are broken up into little sections all over the state. It's really hard to cover Mississippi. Like we live in Central Florida. There are players everywhere here. It's easier to cover. There are more analysts. So if Waller lived where you and I do, his recruitment would have been covered a lot differently. So I'm not really concerned about what his ranking was 6 months ago. I just know he has NFL talent. You put on the tape, that's the bottom line. His upside, again, kind of like Camarion, is very, very high. And anytime you can get an edge rusher or D tackle, I don't care which one, especially in your backyard, man, you got to go get him. And he's a kid that can play early at a Georgia or Alabama, to put his talent level into perspective.
Yeah, and people need to understand also, I think he announced 4 official visits he's going to take in the summer. Remember June 1st that the official rules change and you're not limited to 5 anymore per recruit. Yeah. So official is basically a new word for unofficial. Basically, a player like Jamonte, Camarion Franklin, and people going to be able to bring him in and pay for it, yeah, they're going to do it. So he's going to end up having 20 official visits.
I don't know exactly where he's going to go on all the visits, but once they brought that, I'm glad you mentioned it. Once they brought that rule in, I'm like, I don't know if this is going to be good or not, because some of these kids are going to wear themselves out even during the regular season. But again, defensive linemen, everybody wants them. Maybe he goes visits Ohio State, maybe he visits Southern Cal. This could drag on, and this could be a signing day deal for both those kids. So it's interesting, but Ole Miss, they're in the mix for both. And, man, those are the kind of guys that change your program. Again, they got to find a way to keep them home.
Now, a little bit off script, and I didn't tell you about this kid, but do you know anything about Chris Davis?
A little bit, but, again, you're talking about kids that can make an impact.
Yeah.
You got – this is the kind of kid that Ole Miss has to get if they're going to take that next step. So, I mean, what's the rumor mill on the Ole Miss side? What are you hearing about him? And I'll give you what I know.
Chris Davis he's an explosive athlete that's coming in. I've compared him to that elite type running, almost like a Dexter McCluster who went to Ole Miss. He's a little bit bigger than that, but he's an electric type running back. Yes.
I would look at it this way. When you think about a certain running back that came to play for Lane last year, he was a hammer, but he was a smart kid and he figured out how to do it. He's had other kids that were smaller. He's figured out how to use them. Anytime Lane gets a talented player like that, a skill guy, when has he failed to use them? So why would we think that Davis would be anything different? He'll find a way to get him the ball in the slot, running back, whatever. That doesn't matter. I'm very high. Anytime Kiffin is coaching a game, that's the game I generally watch, and even though I'm not an Ole Miss fan. So I hope the kid gets to learn the playbook as soon as he can and figures it out. But if Ole Miss gets this kid and puts him in the system the way Lane usually does, they'll be just fine.
Yeah, I'll tell you my theory on this, and this is just me talking. But I think Lane Kiffin, is from the Pete Carroll tree, the Southern Cal tree, and therefore the most popular running back tandem that he has probably been around was Reggie Bush and Lindell White. And with Quinshon Judkins, he probably sees a Lindell White type. He went out and found the electric back that can complement him in the same way that Reggie Bush did Lindell, and he thinks that is something that'll play even in modern football. That's
absolutely right. That's absolutely right. Mm-hmm. Thunder and lightning is an old saying in football, and I don't think that's going to change. There's nothing worse than getting beat up, and then in the fourth quarter they put the rabbit in, and then you got to chase him. So it's like when a cluster – that guy, holy cow, he was shot out of a cannon. So if Ole Miss fans remember that, now compare him. Judkins is one of my favorite players in college football, period, because he just does everything. Mm-hmm. You're going to get beat up by him, and then you got to chase the other kid after you're tired. That's not a good time. So with Lane Kiffin's play calling ability, good luck to SEC defensive coordinators.
Thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. Every dayers tomorrow on the show, we'll be continuing our post-spring report cards. You'll see many videos up on the site. Anyway, thank you, Brian, so much for stopping by and talking a little recruiting. I spent 10 years at Rivals.com, so I like talking recruiting. It's one of those things. So,
well, thank you for having me on, and I'm always ready to talk recruiting.
All right, we'll talk to you next week, bud.
Take care.